Good afternoon and welcome to the inaugural lecture of Dr. Christine Neuhold, who will today, with delivering this lecture, accept her position as extraordinary professor of EU democratic governance in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. The title of her lecture is More Bureaucracy or More Democracy, the EU at the Unrepresentative Turn. May I ask you to deliver your lecture?
Dear Pro-Rector, dear Rhein, dear professors, dear colleagues, dear students, dear family and friends, it's a great honor and pleasure for me that you're here today to attend my inaugural lecture. In the following, I would like to shed some light on the possible tension between bureaucracy and democracy in the European Union and how I see my contribution to that debate. For those of you who have been to Mini Europe in Brussels, after strolling past the tiny Tower of Pisa, the Austrian monastery of Melk, to the Houses of Parliament in London with the Eiffel Tower in the background, you might have noticed at the end of the tour the following question. A democratic union? ? And the simple answer is, of course. So the question of the EU's democratic nature seems very straightforward, and my lecture could stop right here. But of course, we know, as this question relates to the European Union, it cannot be that simple and must be inherently fraught with complexity. What the exhibition of Mini Europe fails to address is that the European Union has indeed been diagnosed as suffering from a malaise, the much proclaimed and debated democratic deficit. Some scholars find that the roots for this deficit can be traced back to the fact that decision-making powers were transferred to the European level, but that national parliaments lost out in the process. Some others, such as Hicks and Follestal, connect this deficit also to the way legislatures work, but this time this malaise is attributed to the European Parliament and here to the way its members are elected. While crucial decisions are taken at the European level, European Parliament elections are not contests about the content or direction of EU policy. European Parliament elections are not about Europe, but have until recently been described as second-order national contests. Yet others, such as Joe Weiler, posit that the basic foundations of European democracy are lacking, as the European Union consists of peoples rather than one common set of people. Europe is thus consisting of demoi rather than one demos, but without such a demos, there can in fact be no democracy, according to Weiler. What I want to do in the next 35 minutes or so, together with you, is to look at the issue of the EU's democratic base from a slightly different angle, and bring together, of course, metaphorically speaking, the egg white and the yolk of an egg together without making scrambled eggs. Although there is a far-reaching debate on the role of bureaucracy and the politics thereof, and an expanding literature on the role of parliaments in the European Union, these questions have been treated by very different canons in the literature. To stick with the metaphor, the egg white and the yolk have been kept apart so far, although in some cases they actually inhabit the same space, parliaments. The question of the role that unelected officials play within parliaments and to what extent this relates to the democratic malaise that the European Union seems to suffer from has thus far largely been eclipsed by the academic debate. The main question at stake is whether the empowerment of unelected officials in parliaments in the European Union is leading to an unrepresentative turn in the European Union, or whether there are other factors that contribute to an exacerbation of the alleged democratic deficit. But before we can focus on this particular issue, we need to take a step back from diagnosing what could actually be wrong with the European Union, and need to answer two big questions. First, what do we actually mean by democratic legitimacy in the EU context? And secondly, how has the European Union attempted to address questions of legitimacy by way of treaty reform? This detour is necessary in order to sketch the context that officials are working in within European parliaments. If we look at the literature, we find that it is almost impossible to give a concise definition of what legitimacy might mean for the European Union, and it's almost always broken down into numbers or bullet points. According to Lord and Magnette, a legitimate EU is thus defined by 4 vectors. Indirect legitimacy. This departs from the assumption that the legitimacy of the European Union is fueled by its member states. Parliamentary legitimacy. Here the European Union is based on a dual legitimacy, legitimated by governments in the Council and the European Parliament that is directly elected. Technocratic legitimacy. Union institutions are best legitimated through their ability to solve regulatory problems. And last but not least, procedural legitimacy. Here legitimacy may be enhanced as long as certain procedures, such as transparency and consultation of stakeholders, are adhered to. Recently, a lively scholarly debate has shifted away from this discussion of democracy and legitimacy in a wider sense, and has focused on the quality of the European Union when it comes to the standards of representative democracy, leading some authors to proclaim a representative turn in European Union studies. In order to adhere to certain democratic norms, a representative system needs to govern in such a way that citizens can see to be both of and for the people. Accordingly, the way that representatives are chosen must be of such a nature that citizens can see that their views and interests are represented equally. And when representatives take decisions, these must also reflect perceptions and interests on an equal basis. Western-style political systems today are generally categorized as representative democracies, as is the European Union. So, let me briefly put so far what I said into the metaphorical nutshell. The European Union is mostly defined as resting on a series of different legitimating principles or vectors. If we then look at the attempts of the European Union to redress its democratic deficit, we will see that the emphasis is put on one vector of legitimacy that I've talked about before, parliamentary legitimacy, which is a cornerstone of democratic representation. It is also in this vein that the Lisbon Treaty has been referred by some as the Treaty of Parliaments, as it upgrades both the European Parliament and national parliaments. Representation is a central concept in which the European Union understands its democratic legitimacy. It is even spelled out in the Lisbon Treaty itself that the European Union shall be founded on representative democracy. The role of the European Parliament is upgraded insofar as its competences have been extended. The ordinary legislative procedure, where the European Parliament has a veto right, together with the Council, has been extended to cover 85 different treaty articles, reaching from common agricultural policy to migration. The Lisbon Treaty also strengthens the role of the European Parliament in selecting the next Commission President. Accordingly, and here I quote the treaty, taking into account the elections to the European Parliament, and after having held the appropriate consultations, the European Council shall propose to the European Parliament a candidate for Commission President. For the first time in the electoral history of the European Parliament, Europe's political parties have announced their candidates for the Commission President before we citizens go to the polls, and before the heads of state and government actually put forward their proposal for a candidate. But not only the role of the European Parliament was strengthened, the role of national parliaments was upgraded as well. A cornerstone here is the early warning system. Accordingly, any chamber of a national parliament may review the compliance of a legislative proposal coming out of the EU's machinery with the principle of subsidiarity. To put it simply, national parliaments have to examine, for each proposal coming out of the EU's machinery, whether a decision should be taken at home or at the European level. If national parliaments find that the subsidiarity principle is violated, they can flag this up by passing a reasoned opinion. What is very important to note, however, is that it doesn't suffice for one parliament to raise subsidiarity concerns. In order to flag the so-called yellow card, they have to do so collectively and have to meet rather high thresholds. Parliaments have only 8 weeks to raise a card, and the clock ticks even over the recess periods, such as Christmas holidays. So far, only 2 yellow cards have been raised. So now that we have established that the European Union sees itself as a representative democracy and has upgraded the role of parliaments, I want to focus on the other side of this contribution, the role of unelected officials in parliaments within the European Union system. It is well known and almost self-evident that elected representatives cannot take all policy decisions on their own and have to delegate some of their authority to administrative officials. The factor behind this process of delegation and the implications on policy making, both within national parliaments and the European Parliament, are to a great extent eclipsed by the academic debate. We have to build, therefore, on the more general debate on bureaucratic delegation processes to civil servants and work on ministerial bureaucracies. Any study on bureaucracy, as our research master students, I'm just looking for them, well know, is inspired by Max Weber. The Weberian ideal of a bureaucracy is characterized by hierarchical structures and rule of law. Personnel of this ideal type are career officials that are to be recruited by objective criteria and by educational qualifications. These professionals adhere to strict principles of neutrality, free from all personal considerations. From the debate on the US Congress, we learn that competences are delegated to officials given that clear procedures and rules prevail. The risks of delegation can be minimized if issues are delegated to bureaucratic experts that have some measure of control over policy issues they care about, and as such develop politicized competence. Politicized competence can be defined as the readiness of officials to invest in the development of their own expertise and is not to be confused with politicization or partisanship. When trying to conceptualize the role officials play within policymaking, the work by Page and Jenkins on officials working within UK ministries is also very instructive. They have identified 3 types of policy roles. These reach from a production role, which consists mainly of drawing up drafts and documents, to a maintenance role, trying to ensure that policies run according to agreed principles, to a service role, which consists of offering knowledge, advice, and skills to those involved in policy making. Let us now turn to our research on the role of officials in parliaments and bring the yolk and the egg white of an egg together. On the one hand, we focused on the European Parliament and the role unelected officials play within that institutions. I want to say a few words about who these officials actually are. At the level of political groups, we find political group staff that is recruited to work for the political groups directly, and as such, political convictions can play a role. Moreover, every member of the European Parliament has up to 2 or 3 assistants that he or she recruits directly. And at the level of the European Parliament itself, we find the General Secretariat. These officials are recruited by way of a general competition. Weber says hello, the concours. Yet the number of officials working at the Secretariat in 2005 was 5,000. Yet it is important to note that only a fourth are in fact administrators. In our research that I did with Matthias Dobbels, we focused on those officials working within the European Parliament Secretariat, and we covered vast ground. The cases we studied reached from fisheries to novel foods, to the reform of implementing and delegated acts, so formerly known as comitology, to migration, to the annual budget of 2011. Here it became apparent that officials can exert more influence over the policy process than flagged up within the scholarly debate so far. This might not come as a surprise in a very technical field such as comitology. Officials steered the file. The informal meetings between the Council, the European Parliament and the Commission, the so-called trilogues, were extensively prepared by the Secretariat. They even prepared proposals as to which compromises would be tabled when, but never went beyond the mandate of the rapporteur. The reason why the Secretariat had such a great impact on the dossier was mainly due to its expertise in the file, making this a classic case of politicized competence, an investment in expertise development. Yet, even in cases that were attributed high political importance, such as the regulation of novel foods, which touched upon the issue of cloning, EP officials still played a very important role by drawing up compromise amendments. One has to note that the file was characterized by a highly consensual position on part of the European Parliament, mainly on the issue of cloning. This made it easier for EP officials to fend for the EP's position, as the latter was crystal clear. Our initial assumptions that administrators play a minor role when it comes to files that are attributed great political importance does not hold. Our analysis reflects that a combination of three factors, a high degree of politicized competence, a high degree, surprisingly, a high degree of political importance attributed to the file within the European Parliament, and a high degree of consensus within the Parliament can create the conditions under which officials can play a steering role, and as such contribute to the shaping of policy. These empirical observations feed into the conceptual debate on parliamentary administrative systems insofar as the roles developed for administrative players within ministerial bureaucracies can only be applied to a very limited extent. On the one hand, the maintenance role, where one has to ensure that policies run according to agreed principles, applies more to ministerial bureaucracies rather than to parliaments. But more importantly, under certain conditions, EP officials can assume a role that transcends the respective conceptualizations and play what we call a steering role. This steering role is linked to guarding the institutional prerogatives of the European Parliament. The politicized competence that EP officials gain within the European Parliament is not neutral in the Weberian sense of the word, but expertise that is linked to preserving the EP's position in interinstitutional bargaining. When we then turn to the role that officials play in national parliaments, we find that the specific requirements of carrying out scrutiny of EU affairs, especially under early warning, impose certain frameworks on administrators that lead even to a greater diversification of roles. In our research on officials in national parliaments, which I did with Annalena Högenauer, which covered parliaments in 23 member states, we distinguish between 4 different types of staff roles. If administrators adopt the first role, i.e. that one of an assistant, they are seen to be involved in the actual process of scrutiny only in the margins. They are mere paper keepers, and it's interesting that empirically none of the parliaments we studied fell exclusively into that category. The second ideal type of administrator, the analyst, is much more active in the process of scrutiny, but does not exercise too much influence on the content of the discussions. Only the administration of one parliament was limited to these tasks. Administrators that take on the role of advisors recommend certain solutions, course of action, also prior to debate. A majority of those officials under scrutiny played such an advisory role. Finally, administrators can play a coordinating function across national parliaments to their own government and to the EU institutions. It is interesting to point out that a network of officials has been established at the European Union level. Here we allude to the national parliamentary representatives in Brussels. This network of national parliamentary representatives currently includes representatives from all 28 parliaments and even from a non-member state, Norway. Several bicameral parliaments, such as the UK and Belgium, send 2 representatives, 1 per chamber. These are officials that normally work for their national parliament and are delegated to Brussels for a certain period of time, normally around 2.5 years. They work within the same physical space, along one corridor within the European Parliament, and come together for regular meetings and inform each other when their respective parliament will come up with a reasoned opinion in the framework of early warning. In our research, we try to capture the nature of the network in order to contribute to greater conceptual clarity. We tested 2 concepts advocated in the literature and one we developed on our own, an information network. This would be a network that collects and exchanges information with a view to optimizing the collective knowledge of national parliaments. And after having done our research, and I can't go into the details here, of course, we found that indeed the national parliament representatives fit the conceptual framework of such an information network. Information is, after all, a crucial ingredient if you want early warning to work. After all this, I still have to add an important caveat. While the Treaty of Lisbon has certainly led to a certain degree of bureaucratization of parliamentary business, this should not disguise the fact that the final decisions, the last call, is taken by the directly elected members of parliament. At least this was the case for the parliaments we studied. One of the tasks for future research will be to explore further the differences between national systems of parliamentary administrative support, as well as the factors explaining this variation. For the European Parliament, one would equally need to extend the comparative study of policy domains. We thus have to see whether our insights that transcend the concept of Weberian dualism, according to which politicians take decisions and officials merely implement, actually also holds true for different contexts. The normative implications that arise from the increasing delegation of tasks from elected members to officials also merit further clarification. So, where do we go from here? What does this tell us when trying to answer the burning question of whether the European Union is facing an unrepresentative turn? The equation that the empowerment of officials leads to a representation deficit is not that simple, as they are crucial in assisting elected actors in performing their tasks. Simply put, no democracy without bureaucracy. What is very important for questions of representation is that we could not observe a case where directly elected members of parliament did not have the last call, did not take the final decision. Government for the people is still carried out by those that are elected by the people. The call is still out, however, whether according to the premises that democratic systems should meet, the European Union fares well at the eve of parliamentary elections. We are just witnessing the very beginnings of a public and political debate on who will head the European Commission. This has to be embedded into a larger debate on where Europe is heading in times of crisis. What we know for now is the slogan of the European Parliament: this time it's different. It is different this time because we have a persistent economic crisis. But it is also different because the Lisbon Treaty foresees a mechanism where the preferences over alternative candidates may determine who at the end of the day gets to be Commission President. We see, however, that a lot still has to be done to make this work. The candidates to the presidency of the European Commission have been known rather late for the electorate to make up their mind. More importantly, it has to be clear what type of Europe these presidents to be stand for and how they see the future of European integration. The candidates for the presidency of the Commission might not have anticipated the events rolling out of Ukraine, but they will have to address how these developments relate to democracy, rule of law, and a common stance of the European Union in the domain of EU foreign policy. Moreover, the treaty provisions on the election of the Commission President are not only complicated, but they have very large political implications. Will the heads of state and government in the Council actually stick with what the European Parliament proposes and buy the proposed candidate? On a positive note, some of the candidates in the race for the posts are political heavyweights, which adds political clout to the electoral contest. Nevertheless, citizens cannot vote for these candidates directly, but have to go via their political parties at the national level, which is not as self-evident as it might seem at first glance. Although, obviously, you cannot debate a deficit away, I do agree with those that argue that you need more of a public debate on the direction that the European Union is taking. I'm very happy to say that together with my colleagues, the municipality of Maastricht, the European Youth Forum, Connect Limburg, and our fantastic students, we're involved in the quest of organizing the first debate between the presidential candidates, and we want to thus add to this larger debate, if only in a small way. Overall, I see these elections as somewhat of a turning point, a unique chance to move away from second-order elections. Although today we're not even 2 months away from the elections, it is still too early to tell to what extent this opportunity will actually be seized. I want to conclude by saying that just like in mini Europe, where enormous and impressive castles and buildings are reduced to Lego-style castles, this little excursion has shown that the question of whether or not the European Union is democratic cannot be reduced to a simple multiple-choice question of yes or no. This question will keep us busy for many years to come, and I'm very grateful that I will be able to contribute to this debate through my special chair on EU democratic governance. And now it's time, after some water, for words of thanks. When more than 10 years ago I heard about the fact that one was setting up a Bachelor in European Studies at Maastricht University, my immediate reaction was that I want to be part of this endeavor of constructing Europe. And it was as exciting and as rewarding as setting up the European Union must have been. We're heading for somewhat the unknown. We did not wander through the Alps like Jean Monnet did, but we did ponder for many hours in the Café de Peter how to set this up. There was excitement in the air, and we were all in it together. It does not come as a surprise, then, that there are many people to thank at this stage. First, I have to thank Rein, who supported me from the very beginning, first as my head of department, and then as dean, where I was appointed as associate dean, and we worked together in the faculty board. He was also instrumental in this appointment and provided me with many other opportunities, one of which is to be the director of the graduate school board of this faculty. In this new job, Karin and Thomas Konstelmann have to be thanked for being very encouraging, and Alexandra, Yoshi and Litvin for providing consistent support. If I have someone else to thank, it would be Taneli and Sophie, who brought me to this faculty and have been there ever since. Both of them very generous with their time and support. Sophie is my shining example and my beloved confidant. Taneli went with me to places such as Beijing and Georgia, always with an open ear and a smile and a whistle on his face. At the faculty, I then quickly made other friends, hopefully for life, Esther and Patrick. Life with Esther would only be half as fun. With whom else can you discuss such diverse topics such as tofu mums and risk regulation? Patrick, with his large helping of wit, turns every small dinner into an event. Many other encounters have ensued that go beyond being mere colleagues, and here I can only name a few. Heidi, my wonderful Austrian host, Elisaveta, Annetta, Paul, Christine, and my train buddy, Bram Ackermans, and my campus neighbor, Melissa Beltkens. I would of course also like to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues from the Observatory of Parliaments after Lisbon, the Opal project, and here especially of course the Maastricht team of Thomas Christiansen, Annalena, Alexander, and Afke, and Olivier from Sciences Po, and Julie and Ariella from Cambridge. The colleagues of the INCOP network, Interinstitutional Cooperation in the European Union, also merit a special thanks, where a large share of this goes to Sophie, with whom I coordinated this INCOP network together. It was composed of wonderful researchers such as Matthias and Anne-Claire, which I already miss. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank my wonderful parents for the unconditional love and unconventionalism right from the start. There are no words to express what I feel for my sister. I will be brief on these things. And I'm not sure I would be here without Sun. And of course, my beloved daughters, Anne and Sophie, have made it all worthwhile. So now I will get my strength. In times of leaning in, where women proclaim from across the Atlantic that they cannot have it all, our daughters believe they can. And I very much hope so and wish we help them along the way. Ik heb gezegd.
Well, Professor Neuhold, I would like to thank you on behalf of our academic community for this very energetic and also say fast-paced lecture. I'm usually not used to that by Fasos, but I think it's always a pleasant surprise. When I read the title of your lecture, More Bureaucracy and More Democracy, and then I got a phone call, I thought for a moment it was a discussion about our interaction at this university, because these are of course issues that we also have discussed, and will you continue to discuss how you bring these two things together. But I think what you have made very clearly is that you will, in your new position, continue to contribute to one of the strongholds of this university, particularly looking at European governance. And I think if you look at the current discussion surrounding European elections and the European Parliament, there will be a lot of research work to be done. There will also be a lot of to be done that has to be transformed into educational programs. And I think that's why your position is very important, also to link these research efforts to the master program, the bachelor programs, and maybe also new programs that will develop in the future at this faculty. So having said that, I wish you that your wonderful time here in Maastricht continues also in your new position, that you will, as I'm sure, with your colleagues, contribute to make this and these programs a success. And I think it's an effort you have put in with Sophie van Honacker and your colleagues to get the presidential debate here to Maastricht after some disappointments the city had, particularly in the context of the cultural capital, shows that the name of Maastricht and the name of the university and is still something that represents Europe a bit. And I'm very happy that you will continue also in the future to contribute to that. So with this, I would like to close the formal part of this academic celebration. I would like to invite everybody to follow the cortege to the Refter, where there will be a reception, where we will have an opportunity to congratulate Professor Neuhold. I would like to encourage you not to stand in line, to also mingle and take your opportunity to congratulate you on your new position. And I think now we can close this academic celebration, and please give us the time to move ahead and lead the way to the Refter. Thank you.